All right, let's dive right in. Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're unpacking the narrative found inside what is, without a doubt, history's most influential and widely read book, the Bible. Specifically, we're going to look at its central figure, Jesus Christ. Now, whether you approach this text from a historical, literary, or theological standpoint, the story detailed here is undeniably one that fundamentally changed human history. Going back over 2,000 years, this narrative is anchored in some pretty profound universal themes. We're talking love, sacrifice, forgiveness, and hope. It's an absolutely incredible narrative to break down. So let's explore exactly what the source material says and discover why, today, billions of people across the globe consider Jesus to be their savior. To make sure we fully grasp this narrative, we've structured our explainer into 4 chronological parts: prophecy and arrival, teachings and miracles, opposition and sacrifice, and finally, resurrection and legacy. Let's get started.
Part 1. Prophecy and Arrival.
To truly understand the impact of this story, we actually have to look back hundreds of years before Jesus was even born. The text paints a picture of a world that was steeped in injustice, tyranny, and just this overarching atmosphere of fear. The people were desperately waiting and hoping for a prophesied Messiah who would arrive to free them from darkness. And this timeline doesn't just happen overnight. We start with those ancient Old Testament prophecies. Then, the timeline moves to the highly anticipated arrival, his birth in Bethlehem. From there, the Bible actually tells us very little about his childhood, with one major exception. When he was just 12 years old, the text describes him sitting in the temple, deep in discussion with religious scholars, leaving literally everyone astonished by his wisdom. After that remarkable event, he lives a pretty quiet life for about 18 years, until he reaches the age of 30, which is when his public ministry officially begins. But let's zoom in on that arrival for a second, because the contrast here is just staggering. For all the grand prophecies of a conquering savior, the actual arrival described in the text is incredibly modest. Jesus is born in a tiny town called Bethlehem, and not in a palace, but in a simple, humble stable, to an earthly mother, Mary, and her husband Joseph. Yet, the biblical account tells us that this quiet, totally obscure birth was accompanied by a massive, supernatural announcement. Angels reportedly appeared in the night sky to local shepherds, declaring a monumental message: "Today a Savior has been born to you." And the narrative expands even further outward from there. This wasn't just some local event. It had cosmic significance, according to the text. Step 1. A special, highly unusual star appears in the sky. Step 2. The celestial marker catches the attention of wise men, or magi, from a distant eastern land, prompting them to undertake this massive journey. And step 3, they arrive to honor the newborn child with precious gifts. The crucial point the source material is making here is that this was no ordinary birth. It was being signaled as the definitive dawn of a brand new era for humanity. All right, fast forward 30 years, and we enter part 2, teachings and miracles. This is where Jesus steps into the public eye, and he completely flips the script. This quote brilliantly illustrates the core of his message: love your neighbor as yourself. He didn't just teach people a rigid list of religious rules to follow. Now, he actively and practically demonstrated a profound, unconditional love. He elevated the poor, he touched the untouchable, and he challenged the societal norms of his day by insisting that genuine love and compassion were the absolute highest calling of human life. And he backed up those teachings with actions that the Bible describes as miraculous. He healed the sick, gave sight to the blind, and cured lepers. He took a meager offering of just a few loaves and fishes and literally multiplied them to feed thousands of hungry people. The text even describes him speaking to a violent storm at sea and calming it instantly, leaving observers in absolute awe. But if you read the narrative closely, the source makes it really clear that his greatest miracles weren't actually the physical ones. His ultimate miracles were giving profound hope to broken hearts and offering complete forgiveness to those labeled as sinners. He was using these acts to prove a central thesis: that God is, fundamentally, love. However, every radical action causes a reaction. Welcome to Part 3, Opposition and Sacrifice. At this point, a deep and frankly dangerous divide began to form. Among the common people, his popularity and the love for him were just exploding. I mean, he was feeding them, healing them, and giving them hope. But among the established religious leaders, well, fear morphed into a dark conspiracy to stop him. They strongly disagreed with his teachings and felt their authority was being fundamentally threatened by this movement. That conspiracy found its weak link right in Jesus' inner circle. The text details how one of his own disciples, Judas Iscariot, agreed to betray him to the religious authorities in exchange for a sum of money. This betrayal led directly to a sudden nighttime arrest. What followed was a highly irregular trial. According to the biblical account, no solid, legitimate crime was ever actually proven against him. Despite this glaring lack of evidence, he was ultimately sentenced to the most brutal execution of the ancient world, death by crucifixion. This was a punishment specifically designed by the Romans to be the ultimate public humiliation, reserved exclusively for rebels, slaves, and the absolute lowest classes of society. Yet even in the midst of this agonizing execution, the text records a moment that perfectly encapsulates his entire message. While hanging on the cross, he looks at the very people executing him and prays, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." It is a profound, ultimate act of forgiveness, enacted in the absolute worst of circumstances. Now, to understand this text fully, we have to look at the theological weight of this moment. The crucifixion is seen by believers not just as some tragic execution, but as the central, pivotal event of the Christian faith. It's understood as a willing sacrifice that Jesus offered himself up to pay the penalty for the sins of all humanity. But historically speaking, in that exact moment when he died, his followers were plunged into absolute despair. Everything they had hoped for, everything they had believed was just beginning, seemed violently and permanently finished. So, the crucial question is, did the story end here? Because if it did, it would just be a compelling, tragic tale of a good teacher who was crushed by the system. But we wouldn't be talking about it globally 2,000 years later, would we? That takes us to our final section, Part 4, Resurrection and Legacy. This is where the narrative pivots from profound tragedy to unprecedented triumph. According to the biblical narrative, here is what goes down next. Step 1. 3 days pass after his death and burial. Step 2. A group of his female followers go to visit the tomb, only to find the heavy stone rolled away, and the tomb completely empty. Step 3. Jesus physically appears to his disciples, alive. He speaks with them, eats with them, and gives his scattered, terrified followers an immense, renewed courage. This specific event, the resurrection, is the absolute, foundational pillar of the entire Christian faith. The text presents it not as a metaphor, but as a literal reality that stands as a powerful symbol, life's ultimate, definitive victory over death. It validated everything he had taught and everything he claimed to be. Before his final ascension, the Bible records Jesus giving one last, monumental command to his followers. He told them, "Go into all the world and spread the message of love, hope, and truth." He didn't tell them to build an empire of land, he told them to build a movement of the heart. And his disciples took that final command literally, carrying that message outward across the entire globe. And the result of that command brings us to this truly staggering number, billions. Today, roughly 2 millennia after these events supposedly took place, billions of people all over the world still look to this story. They draw daily inspiration from his life, his teachings, and his ultimate sacrifice. It's a scale of influence that is completely unmatched in human history. So, what should you really take away from this explainer? It's that the biblical account of Jesus isn't just presented as a dry historical record. The source material intends it to be understood as a story of radical love, a story of unimaginable forgiveness, a story that promises the possibility of new beginnings. Regardless of what background or culture you come from, the text serves as a universal lesson in kindness, compassion, and selfless service to others. Which leaves us with a final thought to ponder. If this narrative teaches anything, it's that profound change starts with individual compassion. So, how will this universal message of unconditional love and forgiveness shape your own actions today? Think about that. And if this explainer has sparked your curiosity or maybe offered you a new perspective, consider sharing this story with someone else. Because as history has shown us time and time again, sometimes a simple message of hope is all it takes to completely change a life. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and we'll see you next time.